Hello, it's Rob here and welcome to my first video of my build series of the Tamiya Avante 2011. Starting with step 1, we've got plastic part here B1, which is the rear differential housing or gearbox as Tamiya are calling it. We've then got this aluminium piece, which is what they're calling the gearbox plate, and we also need two BB4s, which are 3x8mm self tappers, one BB5, which is 3mm by 10 countersunk self tapper, and a BF4, which is 3x10mm standard thread but with a really flat head, and it's just a simple case of screwing the two bits together. And with that done, that completes step 1. Just one more thing to mention, it does tell you to stick a bit of this heavy duty dense foam on. There's a 1:1 scale template there to show you how to cut off the right amount, and then you just peel the backing plate off sheet and stick it on, and that completes step 1. Step 2 is adding the special 2011 Avante GT tuned motor to the differential housing using BP4, which is the motor mount. We also need two BA3s 3x10mm standard thread screws, one BB6 3mm washer, which I've already put on the screw, and then two BC3 3x6mm countersunk screws, a BC6, which is a 3mm grub screw, and a PB2, which is the 22 tooth pinion gear. Now I've already installed the grub screw in there ready. So there's a few notes on this step. The first one being it's pointing you in the direction of how to mount the plate, on which holes to use. So with the wires facing you, it's telling you to use the bottom hole on the left and the top hole on the right. So we get the motor plate lined up, yep, and it's just a simple case of slipping it on. And that's the motor plate installed, and we're now going to need to install the pinion gear. So if we do it this way round, on the motor there's a flat on the output shaft, so we line that up with the grub screw on the correct way round, and then roughly get it to where you think. They're always tricky, these. Just nip that up. And the second note gives you a 13mm gap between the top of the motor plate and the top of the spur gear. So I've got that set on my gauge, and we check it, and now it needs to come out a bit. Right, and after we've fully tightened it, I just double check to make sure, yeah, and that looks perfect. So we can now move on to mounting the motor into the differential. and it says use the screw with the washer on the top plate where the adjustment is, depending on what size pinion gear you've got. And then the last note is telling you to adjust the motor to its fully out position temporarily until you get the centre differential in. So we'll just nip those up, and that completes step 2. Step 3 is installing the differential housing onto the lower deck of the carbon fibre chassis, and for this we're going to need 4 BC2s, which are 3x8mm standard thread countersinks, 1 BH3, which is a battery post, and 3 PC2s, which are 6x12 25mm pipe nuts, as Tamiya are calling them. And in the notes here it also recommends that you put instant cement around the edge of the carbon fibre, which I later found out is just basically cyano super glue. So I've just gone around and done that. You can see probably, hopefully, the semi-gloss look of it now. And I've already installed the battery post because it's just a screw. The other thing it does mention though is to use thread lock. Now normally these kits, when they need thread lock, Tamiya send a little tub of what they call gel type, but for some reason in this kit they haven't. So I've got my own high strength stuff, so I'll be using that. And with that done, that completes step 3. I don't know if you can see there, but there's quite an angle on that motor plate. So we'll see what that's all about a little bit later. Step 4 is prepping the front differential housing, or at least one side of it. So for this we've got plastic part A1, then another plastic part B6, which helps join the two sides of the differential housing together. We've got metal parts BB5, one of, which is 3x10mm countersunk self tapper, and BB7, one of, which is hexagonal mount, as they're calling it. That's for the R-clips, if you see the hole. We've then got one PF1, which is 1150 bearing, and one PF2, which is an 850 bearing. Now, to be honest, I tried test fitting this bearing, and excuse me, I can't get it back out again. It's that snug a fit. So the that bearing's already in place. So we nip this one in here, which is another quite a snug fit, and then it goes into the two holes in the side of the diff housing, and then at the top we've got this hexagonal mount. And there's a note here that says note direction, and it wants you to screw it in so that the R-clip hole is horizontal to the top of this plastic housing. And that's just almost about right. Yep. Yep. And then the countersunk screw goes in the bottom. And that completes step 4. Step 5 is joining the front differential housings together. So for this step we need A1 from the previous step, A2 which is the other side of the diff, B5 which is a strengthening support bar, H4 which is plastic differential, and then on the metal side we've got BB5, 3 of, which are 3 by 10mm countersunk self tappers, and a BB7, another hexagonal mount, and lastly we've got PB6 which is the front propeller joint. So to start with, we take H4 and slot it in between those two bearings we've installed earlier. Get the the prop joint, slide it in until it fits with that flat. And fair warning, that's slipped out on me on my test run, so just be careful. We now need to install this B5, and it slots in to a hole in the side there. However, if you can see there, we've got hex on one side and a semicircle on the other to make sure you don't get it in the wrong orientation. The problem I found when testing this was that there was a little lip on both ends from the moulding which was causing it not to sit in at all on either side, so I've had to go round with a knife and just scrape off until it's nice and flat again, and now it just slots in with a nice click, and it is still a tight fit, but it does now fit. And as I said, there goes the prop joint. And that completes step 5. Step 6 is attaching the front differential housing to the lower deck of the chassis, and also adding E11, which is part of the battery holder. Now you can position this battery holder in one of two places depending on how big your battery is. I've tested this and I need to use the holes to the right. The metal parts we're going to need are BB5, 4 of, which are 3 times 10mm countersunk self tappers, and 2 of these BF4s again, 3mm by 10, with the really flat head. There's also a note here to say for these BF4 screws that if they're a bit tight, then you can apply grease to help it, but I don't think I'll bother with that. finishes step 6. Step 7 is building the two differentials themselves. We've got two BG1 plastic differential housings or gear covers, H8 and H6, which are the front and rear covers for the differentials. Metal parts, we've got BC4 8 off, which are 2mm times 6mm countersunk screws. We've got 8 times PD1, which are 8 tooth planetary gears. We've got 4 times PD2, which are 14 tooth main gears. And we've also need some anti-wear grease, which is supplied with the kit. And this is anti-wear grease. Oh, that's my unused one. And as you can probably see, it's quite thick and gloopy. Now, I have already greased these bits up, and as you can tell, I've already made one earlier. The other thing we get is H9, which is a jig, which goes into the differential housing and holds the main gears in position until you've installed everything. It shows there you're using tweezers to help get these in, and what I found is it's easiest if you look at these planetary gears. We've got a shorter shaft and a longer shaft, and I'll start with the shorter shaft facing down, and we just mess about with it until it sits in place eventually. There we go. And then once it's in place, you can turn over and just double check, and you should see that the shaft is protruding slightly. And then we can go on to the next one. And that's with the longer shaft down, and again you just have to keep playing around, and fortunately that went straight in. That completes step 7. Step 8 is installing the rear differential and the rear counter gear, and for this we're going to need 3 times BB5s, which are 3x10mm countersunk self tappers, 2 BD2 3mm E-clips, one of which I've already installed on BE4, which is 5 times 24mm shaft, and then we've got 2 PA1s, which are these massive 1680 bearings, and 2 PF2s, which are the 850 bearings. And we also need plastic parts, BG2, which is the counter gear, and B4, which is the cover. Now for the cover, although it doesn't say, I've coated around the outside with some of that anti-wear grease to hopefully seal out some of the dust. The first job is to put on these massive bearings. Ooh, he says as he's just noticed he's left the jig in. So they go on and push home. And again, the other side, it says really tight fit. But yes, that's home. And then we need the chassis, and we get an 850 bearing over the shaft with the E-clip already installed. We can poke it through, it doesn't matter which end. These bearings aren't that tight a fit. That completes step 8. Step 9 is installing the front differential with its beveled gear, and for this we're going to need 4 BB5s, 3 times 10mm countersink self tappers, 1 BE5 which is a 2 times 36mm shaft, 2 more PA1s which are 1680 bearings, and then something else I've not seen on any previous builds of mine is 2 PF4s which are really tiny 620 ball bearings. And I can't remember if I've mentioned this in previous steps, but a lot of these steps give you an order in which to do them, and it starts off with H2, the bevel gear, then it says move on to the differential gear, then installing them and then screwing them on. One other note is for this BE5 shaft is it goes through the differential housing, and you need to put a bit of masking tape or electrical tape, some sort of tape, just to hold it in temporarily until some of the suspension's fitted. So we'll start with that. And that completes step 9, he says, as he's just noticed his tape. I'll have to do that again. I think there might be some grease on it. But that completes step 9 and also finishes off the first of my videos on this build series. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and I hope you join me for part 2, where I think we'll be putting the rear suspension on. Thanks for watching. Bye.